special edition of Voice from the Village. Tonight we'll be talking to 6 of our 7 city council candidates, an opportunity to learn from them what they feel are the challenges facing our community and maybe get a glimpse of what they see as the future of Santa Cruz. First, let me say that I appreciate all of your commitment to public service. As a former candidate myself, I know the kind of sacrifice it takes just for the opportunity, to be able to serve on city council. So from a grateful community, I think, thank you very much. Your work is recognized and appreciated. Joining me this evening, 6 of the candidates: Laney Sherman. Laney, welcome. David Terrasas. David, welcome. Bruce Van Allen. Bruce. Rochelle Naroyan. Gary Knutson, and Craig Bush. Welcome to all of you, and I will say before we start that this is a live call-in show. We are absolutely positively live, and I've got this gizmo right here that's going to take your phone calls. So if you'd like to call 425-8848 extension 30, 425-8848 extension 30, you can ask one or any of the candidates a question. So you folks have been through 9 days out now. You've been through the cauldron of the candidate forum cycle. I suspect that they're all done now. I don't know if there's any more scheduled, but certainly you're now out walking as you have been, talking to people of Santa Cruz, knocking on the doors. Laney, start us off. What's the kind of #1 issue and subject that people have been talking to you about as you go through the neighborhoods and talk to folks?
Well, I've knocked on probably several thousand doors now and spoken to a lot of people, and I always ask people when I knock on the door, what kind of concerns do you have for the city of Santa Cruz? And there are 2 themes that really emerge as the top concerns for folks. One of the things that I hear a lot about is our homeless situation, and the other thing that I hear almost as much about is the water supply future for our city. I'd say those are the 2 main issues that I hear people bring up.
And David, this is your 3rd campaign, I guess, and of course you're an incumbent, and you've been knocking on doors for quite some time. You and I had the pleasure of running with you in 2010. Enjoyed that very much. What are people telling you about what their concerns are in the community?
Well, thanks, Steve, and actually thank you for hosting the show this evening and bringing all of us together for this forum. Knocking on doors throughout Santa Cruz is really an amazing thing. When you're able to talk with voters one-on-one, you hear directly what their concerns are, and you can do it in a way where people are actually very much open to hearing about the issues facing our town and also hearing from candidates about their positions. And I think for me, the one thing that stands out the most, aside from individual issues such as water, public safety, and also issues facing our town in regards to environmental protection, the one thing that stands out is they're looking for candidates, they're looking for elected officials that are going to approach problems in a thoughtful, logical way, to want to be thinking about these issues, not just about solving something for today, but for the long term. And so when you sit and have an opportunity meet with residents, regardless of what the issue is, they're really looking for people that are going to be engaged in them in a way where they know that they're going to be here for the long term, and I find that to be very rewarding.
Oh, interesting. Well, thanks a lot. And Bruce, Mayor in 82 and 83, you're certainly knocking on doors and reintroducing the community to you as an active candidate. What have they been saying to you?
I'd say the most common thing is that people are appreciative that I helped steer the city away from the desal proposal. People are very concerned about water supply. They want it secure, but they don't want it too expensive or too energy consuming or contributing to global warming. And that I find in every neighborhood I've been to now is one of the most common things.
Right.
It's also true that the range of concerns of people in Santa Cruz is quite wide. And when I ask them more what's on their mind about the city, certainly poverty and homelessness, economic development that's appropriate for Santa Cruz is a real big concern, and protecting the environment is a perpetual concern of Santa Cruz, and that's been showing up again in this election. It's been gratifying how many people have known my name. And, still, it's been a long time since I was on the council before, but they appreciate that I've been working and have the experience to make a difference.
That's interesting. And Rochelle, certainly they know your name. I had the pleasure, as I was talking to David, of running in the election 2 years ago with you, and you received a very large number of votes. In fact, not enough, unfortunately, to get a seat on council, but you're a veteran of knocking on doors. You were just saying earlier that you'd been out canvassing. Well, what are the folks saying to you?
It depends on what neighborhood I'm in.
Yeah.
It really makes a difference. On the east side, it's a lot of issues about traffic and people zooming through neighborhoods to get around the 2 main arteries. And so people want to see a little more traffic mitigation and ways to slow traffic down through their neighborhood. People who live near a park, their big issues have to do with how they're affected with the transient population and how they use the park and how they don't feel safe using the park in their neighborhood. Some of the other overriding issues are, I have to commute the hill to have a job to afford to live here. Wouldn't it be nice if Santa Cruz worked on economic development?
Absolutely,
So we
yeah.
could have a job here locally. So those are the themes that I'm finding as I'm walking precincts.
And Gary, an office holder in other than city council affairs, but a newbie to the city council race itself, how have the people been reacting to you, and what are they saying to you as you go around and knock on doors and introduce yourself to the people of Santa Cruz?
Well, the people who have encouraged me to run for city council have several issues that they're concerned about. The primary concern is water and a sustainable source of water for our community. It's number one on their agenda. Some actually support the desal, which I'm not really an advocate of. I think there are better alternatives than desal. I think the desal is one of three real possible alternatives. I believe in more water conservation, making better use out of our water resources coming out of the San Lorenzo River. Currently, we pump out about 300 million gallons of water per year that go through our treatment plant and then end up going to all our users. In addition to that, we have removed a large water reservoir on Cardiff and High Street.
Okay.
And it has gone from over 90 million gallons of storage capacity down to 6 million gallon capacity containers, of which one is only online at this particular point in time.
And certainly, there's something that we're all concerned about. As we all know, they have the water supply committee now, and that's important that everybody's kind of looking at that and seeing what we can do. Craig, you're probably the least well-known of the candidates this time around. Not a bad thing, probably. But how have the people have been reacting to you when you're out introducing yourself to the people of Santa Cruz?
Well, I listen to their concerns. It's water security, cost of living, and the economy. There's other little smaller things like congestion and noise pollution on the weekends early in the morning, and we can do something about that. But my major concern and my reason for running is to bring water security to our community, economic stability. A system that I want to introduce will put us in a position to export water, which will lower our water bills. And that's been a major thing I've been hearing about, our water bills going up. This system I want to introduce and hope to implement, it will lower our water bills, put us in a position to export water, give us the revenues we need for crumbling infrastructure, and that blowout at the clock, that's just the beginning. This desal took millions of dollars out of our economy and our water department and left us with very little for repairing infrastructure, and that's why our water bills are going up. They have to address these issues now. Now, the system I want to introduce is a partnership with the state, for they own the river. And they have a budget for this new technology that I want to introduce. And I want to partner also with the federal government, who they control the Marine Bay Sanctuary. And they have funds for this technology too, under W21 legislation that's endorsed by Senator Barbara Boxer. This gives us money for this technology because it'll have a huge positive impact on the Marine Bay Sanctuary. And this system will enable the return of the salmon. The system will enable 2 million gallons for river augmentation in the summer. This will be the amount of water they need to enable the return of the salmon. And in the winter, we divert this water to Purisma Aquifer, which is underground water that 2 districts share. It's been overdrawn now, and if we restore Parisma Aquifer alone, this will bring us water security.
Okay, and we'll get to more of this as we get through and talk maybe a little more in detail if we get an opportunity about water security. And it's interesting, as I know David could probably reflect upon, and maybe Rochelle, when I ran in 2010 and 2012, public safety was almost the mantra that people were talking about. People were so concerned about public safety in our community. I'm glad to hear that that's not crowding out other issues, that there are certainly issues now confronting people in Santa Cruz that you're all addressing, that you're all hearing, that are other than public safety, and that is certainly a very important issue, but the issues that you've all highlighted here, I think, are equally important and really should not be forgotten. David, let me start with you with the second question. One of the things that I was always concerned about as a private citizen, as a candidate, was our partnership with UCSC, our relationship with UCSC. I think it's essential, in my view, for our growth and development as both a city and a city on a hill to have a strong collaborative partnership. What have you done, or what will you do to strengthen that partnership going forward?
Well, UCSC is important to our town in many ways. It's our largest employer, and I think just when the school season opens, you just see our town become a place where students, flock to our downtown and various parts of our city. So, I mean, it's part of our fabric in terms of what we are as a community. And I think one of the things that we need to look for is how we do work with a university in a balanced way to kind of address not only the impacts of the university, but the benefits that we derive from them in terms of the intellectual capacity that's brought to our city, in terms of the resources of students and the opportunities we get from them. We're now working with the university in new ways to develop technology transfer initiatives so that when students actually graduate from UCSC, we're starting to see many of them remain here in town and start businesses of their own that's creating important jobs for people that live here and actually growing our economy. As a council member, I worked to create a more welcoming atmosphere for students in the downtown. If you go along Pacific Avenue, you'll see some stickers on some of the businesses that say, "We speak slug." I worked with them, and I don't know if you've seen the graphic, but the idea that, there are students that are here and it is part of the community, and making it more welcoming for them, I think, is a really important thing. I feel like over the next several years, we need to look at what other universities, towns are doing to provide a little bit more synergy with the university in regards to sometimes the payment systems that are used from the university, how they connect with our town, housing, how we kind of balance some of our housing impacts, and also look at some of the transportation projects and infrastructure to, not only create infrastructure that's going to help to make, to reduce the impacts of university traffic, but also to make sure that we are creating a place where it creates better infrastructure for residents as well.
And of course, before we go to Bruce, I'll say that 2 years ago, I was advocating this personal rapid transit system, the gondola system, to get kids up to town, because in the stipulated agreement we had with UCSC for their expansion, they did the traffic study, and they have 25,000 car trips back and forth on Bay Avenue every day. And so there's got to be a way to alleviate that, but I digress. Bruce, you've done a lot of work with the university, and certainly you're close to the university. What would you do as a council member to strengthen that partnership?
Well, it has many levels, and the university is a huge institution, in some ways outweighing the city as far as the size and its ability to do things. And so the nature of the partnership is probably the first thing that I want to maintain as collegial and as direct and communicative as possible, because when you have large institutions that overlap in territory, they have to be able to work together. And so to me, it's very important to maintain that. On the second level, the university contributes a lot to our community, and I'd like to see it much more involved in economic development. There are inventions in computer technology, genomics, the biological sciences, engineering, and of course the arts, which the university has always contributed to locally. And each of those things is actually a piece of what could be a diverse kind of medium to small business economy for Santa Cruz that we don't quite have yet right now. We have too many jobs in Santa Cruz are based on minimum wage and sectors that the growth has probably is beginning to reach its limits, whereas with small businesses based on some higher paying jobs in technology and some of those other areas, there's a lot more potential for the medium and small sized businesses. So that's the second area, is more cross-fertilization with the university and the town. And then the university certainly has impacts, traffic, growth, water use, and things like that. And this is where it's especially important, in my view, for the planning that both the city and the university do for the future, that those be worked together and in synchrony as much as possible. I have a lot of reservations about the plans for the expansion to the upper part of UCSC campus. I think a lot of that land ought to be preserved as natural preserve, and the water that might be available for it is a very tricky question. And I'd like the university to see its relationship with the city as more of a partnership in planning that, so that it really works well. Certainly it'll have a big impact on town.
And Rochelle, you work on campus, and you've done some great work, in fact, which I am personally familiar with the students. And so how would you, as a council member, really strengthen this bond we're talking about with the city and the city on the Hill?
Well, I'm already doing that, as you mentioned, as part of my job as a community representative for the campus. I mentor 2 interns who reach out to the community, and they're the face of the student body. They try to talk to their peers. It's called the Good Neighbor Initiative. And so they reach out to their peers to try to teach them how to be good neighbors when they're out living amongst us in the community, to understand that having a party on a Wednesday at 2 a.m. when their neighbor who has to get up at 5 to go over the hill is really not a workable solution. So I've worked with them on that sort of level. Also, when the students leave town, we've created a move-out program since I arrived, where students are encouraged to reuse their items, sell the items they don't need to use, give them away, and then at a very minimal amount goes to the landfill instead of sitting on our sidewalks or ending up in our waterways.
Absolutely,
And
yeah.
so those programs have been really successful. So as Bruce mentioned, there's so many different levels
Right.
when it comes to
Sure.
university relations. There's that level that I work at, but then there's also the level of encouraging technology transfer, economic development. Water use is really important, and the university's done an amazing job. They use less water than the 2 golf courses here in town, even though they have around 8,000 people living on campus. So I think keeping the relationship collegial is really important. I think we've come a long way in the last 6 to 7 years. That relationship really wasn't there. In fact, it was quite antagonistic. And I think it's great that we're on this better path. We just have to be vigilant to make sure that we stay on the better path and we represent the city's values and interests as we go forward if UCSC plans on growing.
And I think it's an apt observation. I think the relationship has improved over time. I think the longstanding town gown dilemma that people used to talk about maybe is fading somewhat, but I think that has to be through inspired leadership, both at UCSC and here in town. I think, we have the potential, at least, to get those things going. Gary, your views on maybe a stronger partnership between UCSC and the city and the value of that?
Well, certainly UCSC is a major asset for the city and county of Santa Cruz. They not only contribute a tremendous amount of money and resources, and they have world-class programs. Their biology departments are excellent, they're world-class. Their astrophysics departments, their mathematical departments, their psychology departments, I think they're great assets. I think they serve the community very well. I would agree with a comment that was just made a few moments ago that I think there has to be more social intervention with the students to make them understand that they are guests in our neighborhoods and they need to learn how to respect us more when they're traveling down our roads and highways. And we need to work on some road improvements that would enhance the entrance and exit of not only the students but the faculty, because if you go down High Street in the evening, you're going to see it take you 35, 40 minutes to make a turn down onto Story. And so I think there are some things that can be done in that regard, and it's certainly going to take work with the university to agree to put some additional paths in there, road paths, to improve the flow of traffic. And certainly speed is an issue. We have people driving down Western Drive. They raised the speed limit from 25 to 30 miles an hour, and they're now traveling at 45 and 50 miles an hour. And you don't see a very large access or presence of our local
Well,
peace officers.
certainly issues of concern. Craig, how are we going to make this partnership work between UCSC and the city?
Well, I've written about our relationship with the university on my website, bush4scouncil.com, xa.com. Now, there's a lot that we can do to improve this relationship and to, I was disappointed that they tried to skirt our water conservation ordinances a couple of years back. And I think that's something that we could expect full cooperation and full partnership with. Now, they're a big, powerful muscle, the university. Recently, they donated $300,000 to the city to help formulate a new spy agency to go around spying on people of Santa Cruz to see what students are living off campus in disputable spaces, like sleeping on a couch or in a building with a window too small or that's a few feet too short. Recently, they bagged this one lady who was on a PTA. She was living behind her parents' house. And they bagged her for the building didn't have the right size window. So here we have a city council willing to divide families up and the university just to keep students up on campus, to keep the dorms full. And I think this is a waste of money. And I would encourage people of Santa Cruz to have harbor for students, afford them cheaper housing, because student tuition is a ripoff. They can't afford that.
And certainly the rental stock in Santa Cruz, as it's impacted by influx of students and that kind of thing, is something that you all as city council members are going to have to struggle with in the present times and moving into the future. That is going to be a continuing issue to discuss and to confront. Lainey, you're doing a lot of work up on campus, talking to some people. You understand, I'm sure, the importance of this relationship between UCSC and the city. What would you do as a council member to really foster that and make it grow stronger?
Well, one of the recommendations of our Public Safety Task Force, which convened for a year and made recommendations last spring, was more pro-social after-school programs for our young people. And I think this is a great opportunity for collaboration with the university. We have a bunch of students in elementary school, middle school, and high school that need more after-school programs. There's a bunch of university students up on the Hill that need real-life experience and internships. So creating that internship program, I think, would be fantastic opportunity for students at UCSC to have more investment in our community. If they work in after-school programs, they'll feel less like visitors in our town. They'll have a real connection. And of course, it's great for our students as well. 7th graders don't want to hang out with me after school. They want to hang out with some 21-year-old that knows all the latest apps on their iPhone and everything. Yeah. So I think that's one avenue that we could pursue that would be relatively low cost to both parties. But if the university and the city, for example, split the cost of a salary for an administrator, right, we could get a lot of interns in our schools, and that would be a tremendous asset, both in terms of experience for university students and in terms of what we would gain as a community. There are a couple of other areas, I hope you don't mind.
No, please.
One thing is, of course, Cowles Beach is filthy, and nobody's really figured out why or what we can do about it, and we have this world-class institution. So I would like to see more collaboration with the marine biology departments up there and the marine lab that we have out on the west side, really getting serious about identifying the cause of the bacteria bloom in Cowles and trying to figure out what the source is and what concrete steps we can take. Every year this comes up, and every year everybody in Santa Cruz says, oh my gosh, it's terrible, our beach, it's so dirty. But let's get serious about bringing those students down here to see if they can figure out what the cause of that is. Again, that's more investment in the community from the university students, and it benefits our town. Of course, I think incubating jobs from the university down here is a tremendous idea as well. That brings better paying jobs to Santa Cruz. So there's a possibility for collaboration and incubation in town that will increase the possibility for students to stay here after they graduate, and it will also increase job availability here in town.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because I know that a couple of years back or so now, Next Space had an entrepreneurial program that they had. They partnered with some students from UCSC, brought them down and did some of that kind of incubation, you know, entrepreneur development. And I think it was on a small scale, but nevertheless, it's an idea that maybe if you can expand upon, you can use that as a model, could really be valuable to use some of this brain power at UCSC and to keep it local. And I'll stay on that theme a little. I'm glad that we're now around to Bruce, because a lot of discussion has always been had about, you know, to be able to work local, to be able to live local, to buy local. And yet we really haven't, in my view, had the commitment to really develop any kind of affordable housing in Santa Cruz over the last few years. Bruce, give us your ideas about how we can actually be able to afford to live here, how the city council, you as a council member, can help create the kind of affordable housing that we really are so much in need of.
Well, I have a few ideas about that, Steve, thanks. The first thing is that I helped build affordable housing after the earthquake, built several hundred units because so much was lost in the earthquake. And at that time, there were a lot of funding sources, state, federal, private, and city. And the city had dedicated staff, a large number of staff devoted to developing affordable housing. And I'd like to see the city get back to that as a high priority. And secondly, I've been doing a lot of work on the San Lorenzo River over the years, and I regard that as, you know, it's kind of a back alley now in the center of town. It ought to be the centerpiece of town, and part of that would be to have that space be made available for development of more housing. We could have more height, more density near the river. It wouldn't harm the habitat value of the river, and it's really very much underutilized now. So there could be actually some new development that doesn't ruin neighborhoods, doesn't destroy views. It's right downtown in the center where the transportation and the jobs are and so on, and to me has tremendous potential. Additionally, of course, you know, in local government, we're subject to so much when it comes to housing that's really about the state and the federal economies and also governmental priorities. And if I were elected, I would make the time to pressure, along with people from other communities, our state government, which used to sell bonds to help finance local affordable housing projects. And the federal government needs to get back to what it has done historically, which is provide a great deal of funding that was cut drastically a few presidents back, as some of us have commented, President Reagan, cut federal housing subsidies to 1/10 of what they had been for several decades before that. That had an immediate drastic effect on homelessness and on the ability to develop and maintain affordable housing. And so we need to put pressure on the federal government. I don't mean to skirt the local responsibility by mentioning that, but it is a huge factor because housing is so expensive now.
Yes. Certainly, it's going to be a collaborative effort.
Absolutely.
And I can't point to you're going to be a city council member, you develop some affordable housing because we need it. It certainly is a simplistic approach to it, which really isn't going to get us where we need to go. Yeah. And Rochelle, your ideas about affordable housing, as I know you have spoken out about this during time.
Absolutely. And I grew up in Santa Cruz, and I grew up in a blue-collar family. And the only reason I own a home is because my parents came here in the 1970s, bought their house for $28,000 on the west side. And when my mother passed away, I ended up with that home. And so, basically, I'm here because things were inherited. I was able to inherit them. So I think a lot of my fellow classmates are in that same situation where they're still here because of families moving here a generation or two before them, and the housing kind of coming down the line for them.
Can I interrupt you just for a second?
Oh, sure. You have a call?
Yeah. Hi, you're on Voices from the Village with the city council candidates. Do you have a question for them?
I do.
Okay.
I'd like to know.
Yes?
Yeah, I'd like to know if any of the candidates have any ideas of relieving congestion on highways 1 and 17 during the commute hour.
Okay, I'll get that to them the next round. So thank you very much. Appreciate the call. It's a good question. So please continue, Rochelle. I'm sorry.
And like Bruce mentioned, the federal government spent 10 times more on housing back when Nixon was president than we do today. We also have redevelopment funds that the state used to allow communities to raise, and that was the number one thing that redevelopment funds were used for, was building affordable housing. Not having the federal funds and not having redevelopment has made it really difficult for communities to address housing. So I think we need to get the state, if they're gonna take redevelopment away, they've gotta get us another way to raise funds, perhaps financing districts, which have been talked about a lot. And I guess I should just keep going, and I'm not quite sure what else to say about housing. So, but, I mean, some of the ideas that you mentioned, Bruce, I think it's really important. We need that federal and that state piece to come together. But what I was trying to say was infrastructure financing districts at the state level, which haven't passed. Brown has vetoed those. Hopefully, he won't veto the next ones that come up.
Good. Thank you. Gary, you live locally, buy locally. How are we going to do this? How are we going to afford to do it?
Well, I've lived here in Santa Cruz for 27 years, and fortunately, I bought my house back in 86, I think it was. And I keep on telling my children I'm going to sell the house, and they look at me and they go, "Dad, it's our house. You can't sell it." They're looking to get that house.
Yeah.
And I think that it's unfortunate the redevelopment was taken down in the manner that it was. There certainly was enough abuse in redevelopment agency spending in terms of putting in golf courses and other non-essential things to combat what they consider blight. I think that the state had put together a new proposal in the state law, but it really doesn't work very well. You can go ahead and establish a new redevelopment agency, but you have to backfill all the agencies that you take money from. It doesn't work. Nobody's really fallen into that yet. But I think it would be worth the city council, the board of supervisors, our local elected officials getting together and work with the state to put together another housing program through redevelopment with the same 20% cap that I think they used to have for low-income housing, and go back to that particular model. And in addition to that, because this is state money, the state should have a responsibility for approving the projects to see that the money is being spent in a manner that is proper for the citizens throughout the state.
And it's interesting that you mentioned the abolition of the redevelopment agency, which we all experienced. Ironically, our redevelopment agency here in Santa Cruz is one of the most successful and efficient statewide. And yet we had to suffer the same restrictions as everybody. And now we have a successor agency, certainly, but certainly not the same thing. Craig, how are you going to live locally?
Well, my grandfather, he built homes not far from here for single-income families. And those same homes today requires 2 incomes. Single-income families no longer qualify for home ownership. And our biggest housing building boom today in California is building homes for $10 million homes for wealthy foreigners. I think it's time that we address the housing needs of our citizens. What I would do and push for is a planning for building homes for single-income families that a teacher could afford here on their salary, and have set-asides for graduates of Santa Cruz High School of single-income families. This is so the young people, when they grow up, they don't have to leave. They can see there's going to be a future for them, and just have incentives for this housing project. Build these homes in a village that is water and energy efficient. Stipulate that only electric-only vehicles. Set a development for the future of Santa Cruz that single-income families can afford and actually own a home.
Yeah. And those are certainly fine sentiments. The difficulty, of course, is how are we going to do it? Laney, what's your idea about how are we going to develop these affordable income housing units that we need?
Well, certainly housing is one of the biggest challenges facing us in Santa Cruz, and particularly the difference between what we can earn living here and how much we pay to live here. So I think one step we can take is continue to liberalize the requirements around accessory dwelling units. Right now with the rental inspection ordinance, we're currently removing some accessory dwelling units, which are granny units or mother-in-law units in the backyard. We're removing some of those from the housing stock because they don't meet specific requirements. They may meet every health and safety code, but they're 5 feet too large, or they're too close to the neighbor's house, or the lot size is too small. The city council has made great steps in liberalizing those requirements, and I'd like to see that continue. San Francisco, for example, recently decided that accessory dwelling units that don't violate health or safety codes, they're just gonna grandfather all of them in. They call them existing but non-compliant. I'd like to see us move in that direction. Currently, one of the requirements is an owner occupancy requirement, which I actually like the owner occupancy requirement because it maintains the integrity of a neighborhood, and the integrity of neighborhoods is really important to me. But I don't want to see any housing be removed from the market because there's an absentee landlord. So one thing that we could do that would have a pretty quick effect, I think, on the availability of low-income and affordable housing is if we have a situation where there's an absentee landlord, there's a house, an accessory dwelling unit, we could just tell the landlord that they don't have to live on the property as long as they rent out the accessory dwelling unit to low-income people. So that could create a lot of low-income housing really quickly. The thing I like about accessory dwelling units is that they distribute low-income housing throughout neighborhoods, and they're also much cheaper to construct than apartment complexes. So I'm really interested in pursuing, for example, we could subsidize loans for the construction of accessory dwelling units that will be rented out to low-income people. I think that could create more affordable housing. Accessory dwelling units, sort of by their very nature, they're smaller than a house or a regular, living situation. That lends itself well to being affordable or low income. Other things that I think we could do is, as we increase our density in the downtown area, I think we're going to have more multi-use facilities with commercial on the bottom floor and apartments on the top floor. And we currently have a requirement that's frequently skirted where we have this idea that for all new apartment complexes or all new construction, 15% of those units should be affordable. But currently they've been paid into an affordable housing trust fund. I'd like to see new developments build 15% affordable housing. So as we increase the density downtown, we're also creating more affordable housing downtown.
Well, certainly, I think Santa Cruz, with their inclusionary unit ordinances and things of that nature, have tried in their way to set aside some units in all development for affordable housing. But in my view, it doesn't really go quite far enough. David, you're a sitting council member. You certainly have wrestled with this over your 4 years on council. Your thoughts about what we have done right and what we could do better in the future for affordable housing?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I mean, I think creating a housing strategy for the future, I think, was one of our city's biggest priorities. I think just as a resident, as most of us that are watching this program and here are, our housing needs are just incredibly complex. We're not only a town that serves students, but we're also people that live and work here and also have families. So we need to look at a strategy to address all of our housing needs. ADUs, which the city has more recently wrestled with reform, creates a housing plan where through some liberalization of our current ordinances, it's going to add the potential to add another 800 units of ADUs within the city. And I think that's an important thing. We need to make sure that people that are interested and have an opportunity to create an ADU can. Just this weekend, I was with someone who, a single mother who is in a non-conforming lot, and as a result of these new changes in our city ordinance, we'll be able to build an ADU, and she wasn't aware of it. I think we need to communicate that out to residents so they're aware that there are some opportunities for new housing in the city. I also am very much interested in looking at some of the past planning that has gone on in terms of our River Street, Front Street plan. We've done a lot of work. The city never enacted this plan in the past. And what it does do is look at a lot of these comments that have come up just now, in that there's greater density downtown, increasing the height requirements, and also activating our river in a really positive way. And I am 100% behind taking a close look at that. I think bringing in some partners so that we can actually look at what is the appropriate height, how does it fit in with our existing downtown ambiance, so that we are creating something that's additive to really kind of makes it a more vibrant downtown. I think that not only will meet our housing needs, but also contribute positively to the economic possibilities of our downtown. The other thing that we really need to look at is not just the past planning, but harmonize some of these plans. So we're not operating on different playbooks. We need to look at what we've done, come to some sort of path so that we're saying, hey, these are the priorities we have for the future. We talk about building along high traffic corridors, smart growth. But I think the best strategy for us right now is to prioritize what are the highest opportunities for us. And I do believe our downtown along the river is that opportunity that we as a city should be focused on to create the housing needs for our future.
And I couldn't agree more. There are many of us who have urged just that kind of development over time, and maybe it's an idea whose time is finally coming. Certainly, we can all agree that housing and how we house our residents is going to be one of the most challenging issues that those of you who will be sitting on council in the next 4 years are going to have to face. We can address very briefly, the caller said, what can we do about the congestion on Highway 1? Where are we, Rochelle?
Yes.
Just very briefly, you have an idea about that?
I'm really hoping the rail trail is going to take us a long way in alleviating that traffic. It has to be both really to have rail and trail, so people who feel safe riding bicycles can do that, and people who need to have an actual, whether it's a trolley, light rail, whatever it might be. And I'm hoping that with Highway 1, we get the chance to expand it and have an auxiliary lane that will allow a bus to be able to get people back and forth in a more timely manner. That's the challenge, is that people don't want to ride the bus because they're stuck in the same traffic with other folks.
You certainly have given that some thought. I thank you for that. Gary, your ideas very briefly about reducing congestion on Highway 1?
Well, I guess what I would like to see them do is to go ahead and extend the right-hand traffic lane from Soquel down to Park Avenue. And I think that would go a long way to reduce the traffic congestion that we have. I used to travel to Soledad when I was working down there. In the morning, it was no problem. I just would take off and drive down there at the speed limit, and no congestion, no problems. I'd come back, and coming back into Santa Cruz, the traffic would be going the other way, so here again, I didn't have that problem.
Yeah.
And so I think that widening that one corridor from Soquel down to Park would alleviate a lot of the traffic.
That's what I do. Craig, a few words on reducing traffic congestion on Highway 1?
Well, Highway 1, on Highway 17, I think it's time for the monorail. Superconductor technology has advanced to such a degree that it's very economical and energy efficient, and it's time to put that up. For Highway 1, I believe in the bicycle trail from Davenport to Watsonville, eliminating the railroad. The railroad train has no economic value. I would build just a bicycle freeway, just for people-powered vehicles, from Davenport to Watsonville. And on both sides of this bicycle freeway, I would build a organic permaculture corridor that we lease out in sections to farm unions, labor work groups, community organizations. And with the revenues from these leases, I would earmark for social programs and education. Now, underneath this bicycle trail is what I would lay the transfer infrastructure from this new water system that we're going to have, water to export. We could export this water all along that line all the way to Watsonville.
Okay, well, that's an idea. Thank you. Laney, you've done a lot of work and activism around the issues of traffic congestion. Your ideas about how we're going to reduce the congestion on Highway 1?
Well, there's a couple different ways that we need to approach this problem. The underlying cause, I think, of much of our traffic congestion is, again, that differential between what you can earn here in Santa Cruz and how much it costs to live here. That causes people to commute from far away so that they can afford to work low-income jobs, and then it causes people to, again, commute to far away so that they can earn enough money to afford to live here. So addressing those issues of affordable housing and bringing higher-paying jobs to Santa Cruz is part of how we're going to deal with the congestion. Providing better public transportation options that are more attractive and convenient and comfortable is another way that we're going to reduce congestion. Studies show that when you widen a freeway within 6 to 9 months, it again fills up with traffic.
It's the Murphy's Law, but yeah.
So what we really need to think about is what can we do to convince people that it will be more comfortable and attractive to get out of their cars and take a different form of transportation. So I think investment in other infrastructure, including rail trail, including some kind of light rail system or train system, and including the rail trail, I think those will help to alleviate those traffic concerns as well.
Thank you. David, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, transportation is always an issue, big issue, not only in our neighborhoods, but also, as the caller requested, on the Highway 1 corridor. I mean, I can think of three things really that kind of come to mind when I think of what we can do to alleviate traffic congestion. The first one is we do need to do more investment in our public transportation system. I am a strong proponent of Metro, and I think the corridor from Watsonville to Santa Cruz is one where we have opportunities to increase that network and backbone to make it more of an effective system for people that are commuting to Santa Cruz from Watsonville, and to reduce our overall single vehicle occupancy congestion on Highway 1. The other opportunity is investment in new infrastructure. I am also a strong proponent of the rail trail. I think it's one where long-term we have an opportunity to look at as an entirely new piece of infrastructure, transportation infrastructure within our region to get people to and from both sides of the county. And I think we need to do much more to invest in that, to build it up to its true potential. The third thing I would say is really important for us is not just the vehicle transportation, but I think we should be looking at the data transmission as well, because I think when we look at how broadband technology affects regions, it actually creates an opportunity to avoid people to travel to work destinations, because people can actually build up the infrastructure to work from their home, from places throughout the county. The rail trail, the right-of-way on the rail trail is an opportunity for us to look at that broadband infrastructure to use to create an opportunity to reduce congestion on one. As a city council member, I focused on the development of the broadband master plan in the city, which the county has taken up as well. We're looking at a regional plan, and I think the rail line is going to be an important piece of how we kind of build that infrastructure out to help reduce these traffic impacts on our main freeway arteries.
No, thank you for your thoughts. Bruce, how are we going to reduce the congestion?
Well, the one thing about freeways is that if you widen them, they fill up again, and that's been shown all over California, all over the country. So I don't see that as a solution. I'm also a little concerned that it's maybe simplistic to say that if we could only work it out so that not as many people commuted over Highway 17 to the Silicon Valley, that the traffic would be less congested there, because if it's an easy, non-congested drive, more people will decide, okay, that works for them, and they'll fill it up again. So I'm not sure that's a little too simple of a way to look at that problem. I do agree with David, and I appreciate him saying this, that the rail corridor is not only important as a long-term investment in various kinds of transportation, pedestrian, cycling, and ultimately some sort of use of the rails. I don't want to get rid of them. I think it will take a while. Most transportation infrastructure actually is long-term investment before it really works. And so whether it's rail buses now and eventually light rail or other forms of trains, I think we should be thinking about that. But also that corridor, that's now in the public domain, and it ought to be used for the big pipes for the internet connections. Fiber optics or whatever is the best way to transmit large-scale internet connections. That's a perfect place to put it, and I'm glad to hear that David's been working on that, and I think it's a great way to improve the ability for people to not need to drive to be able to work, and that's what we need to be thinking about as much as possible. There, we have a couple local industries that are heavily devoted to expanding the ability to telecommute. Cruise IO was another example of a local institution that's grown quite large, and they are pioneering the expansion of faster and faster broadband and wireless around the county. And so that's the other side of transportation, is not needing transportation. And so that's a really big thing.
And certainly our good friend Celia Scott would applaud everybody's support of the rail trail. She's been one of the true champions, she and Peter, about that. We have about 6 minutes left, and I was hoping to have a little extra time, but so we'll kind of be brief in this last question. My good friend and our good friend Tony Madrigal tells me, and he was a city council member here 2 terms now, a city council member in Modesto, that when you look back on your term as a city council member, you want to have one signature project, one signature program, one issue that you've championed, that you can look back and say, yes, I did that, I accomplished that. Gary, start for us, and very briefly, because we have about a minute for each of you. Looking back 4 years from now, what would you like to have accomplished?
Well, number one would be to have sustainable water source in place. That would be number one. Number two, I'd like to see us not invest $6 million in 3 hotels. I think they can do that on their own with a bridge loan or some other kind of financing arrangement where they can pay that back. I think that $6 million can be used for other better purposes. I'd also like to see more recreation. I think recreation programs are wonderful. They teach our youth sportsmanship, they teach friendships, they teach how to win, how to lose, how to respect each other. And I think it also diverts them from other things that they could be doing with
Okay, good, thank you.
their
Listen,
time.
and Craig, one thing, that's the idea, one thing. 4 years from now, you're looking back, I've been on city council 4 years, what have I accomplished? What do you want to tell people? One
Water
thing.
security, economic stability. Introducing this new water system will put us in a position to export water. This will lower our water bills, provide revenues for infrastructure. This system will enable the return of the salmon, which will have a lot of jobs for academia and the science community, and a lot of peripheral jobs from that. Everybody wants to see the return of the salmon.
Okay. And Lainey, you're looking back after your first 4 years on council, and you're saying, gosh, what was my signature achievement? What do you think it's going to be?
Well, because one of the things that I hear the most about is our homeless population and concerns around that, I'd like to see us establish a recuperative care center in Santa Cruz for people that struggle with mental health problems. We have a lot of people on our streets that are struggling with these issues, and we just don't have adequate services. And right now what we have are the options of incarceration or hospitalization, both of which are incredibly expensive and don't actually deal with the root of the problem. So if we had a recuperative care center specifically for mental health issues, similar to the one that we have a recuperative care center attached to the Homeless Services Center right now. If we had that just for mental health services, I think that would go a tremendous way in our city towards improving the safety of everybody all around and freeing up our police so that they can pursue actual criminals. I'm also really interested in water security, and I'm particularly interested in returning the right of the citizens of Santa Cruz to vote on whether or not we extend our water services beyond the current boundaries. So if I could accomplish that as well, that as 80% of voters would like, as they voted in 2006, that would be a great achievement.
David, you've been on council for 4 years. I'm sure you have a signature achievement, but 4 years from now, what
Yeah.
would you like to say?
I'd say our parks, beaches, and open spaces are our city's greatest resources. And I've been working to set up the Parks Master Plan, the first time we've done one in 30 years, and to look at what are our long-range needs of our parks to protect this priceless resource. What I'd like to do is, once this is completed over the next year, set up an endowment for long-term funding so that when we have these surplus, it helps us to preserve these spaces above and beyond what we budget. This builds upon the work I've done setting up the neighborhood grant program and working with neighbors to kind of, invest in our town in new ways. And I'd like to use the establishment of an endowment to garner the interest of, residents and private donors to help fund the long-term sustainability of our parks. Been working really closely to get at the issue on Cowles Beach with some private environmental groups. And I think this is one way not only for people to work and volunteer, but also to kind of invest priceless resource in the protection of our parks and beaches and open spaces.
Thank you for that. Bruce, your crystal ball, 4 years hence, I have accomplished.
Well, I've been working for a long time on trying to have us transform the river from a neglected back alley into the centerpiece of town, and I'd like to see in 4 years some real concrete movement in 2 areas. One is a project or a set of projects that might involve housing or public art or recreation or something that actually gets on the ground in there. But secondly, and maybe more importantly, is a sense of optimism that we can get the river back, that it isn't just a problem area, and that's something I'm going to work really hard on.
Thank you. And Rochelle, to finish up the evening for us, your thoughts about signature achievement, perhaps?
That we find a reliable water source that'll get us through drought years is of the utmost importance, because everything else we do is going to be based on whether we're successful at that.
Yes. Well, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been a pleasure to have you here. I haven't had an opportunity to see some of your candidate for as you moved along. You've all been very thoughtful and very articulate, I thought, in addressing what are the concerns of our citizenry. There are a lot of things that we need to do in Santa Cruz, and you're all working on those in your individual ways. Santa Cruz, in my view, Cynthia Chase unfortunately could not be here, but Santa Cruz is very fortunate to have 7 so qualified and committed candidates that really want to do something for their city. So we thank you so much for being here. Best of luck in the last 9 days. Get out there and knock on some doors. And ladies and gentlemen, the next time you see these folks, some of them will be sitting in our city council. What you can do, of course, is to get out on November the 4th and cast your vote. That's your commitment to the city of Santa Cruz. So for Charlie Phillips, our producer, for the people behind the cameras in the engineering room, I've been Steve Plach. Thank you so much for watching Voices from the Village, and we'll see you next time. Good night.